good people of Los Angeles and those with Angelino, black and gold, and other sympathies elsewhere. We are back. Season Pass Podcast. 3 games into the return. 3 games to go of this phase of the return. I'm here with Josh Gross, Ryan Wallerson. The 3 of us have covered LAFC since the beginning in different capacities, in different places. And we still love following this team and learning as we go what covering in COVID times is like. I did get a chance to go to Banc of California Stadium for the first of the 3 games. We'll discuss the Galaxy 2-0 victory over LAFC at a supporter and fanless Banc of California Stadium. Seattle Sounders up in Seattle 3-1 defeat of LAFC. About a week after that, in between there was the protest of the Real Salt Lake game that happened across sports, and we'll get into that. And we'll also discuss the San Jose visit to the bank here now a couple days ago. We're recording this on Friday, September 4th, and LAFC down San Jose 5-1. So, guys, there's been a lot that's happened. There's going to be 3 more games to come, and we're going to get into those, especially starting with the Galaxy game on Sunday night. But let's just get some overall impressions. I mean, this is a team, Ryan, that you saw play in Orlando and was very strong for most of the games, sort of ended in a disappointing fashion, but they seem to be on a good trajectory. And the return hasn't been the same story we've heard from LAFC over the last 2 years. There's been some bumps in the road. But what have you seen, Ryan?
Well, they're up and down. But I thought it was interesting that Bob Bradley kind of likened it to form more so than physicality and training. I think I agree with him. I think that there's just a couple guys for the first time, perhaps in the team's short history, you've got just a large amount of players that the team's relying on that aren't in the best of form, because for LAFC, their identity is never really lost. They're always trying to do the same things. And so to me, from my eyes, their ability to put their mark on a game, to play their style in a match, is more so on them than it is on their opponents. And especially in the Galaxy game, I saw a team that was struggling to find its identity more so than I saw a team that was struggling to react to its opponent. I think you saw, kind of a total 180 in that in the San Jose match. So I think it's kind of unfair to say that they're on the downturn, because they're kind of on the upward trajectory after a 5-1 victory, and then they had the washout because of the protests. But it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see the way that they finish out this first phase. Sorry. They didn't look good against the Galaxy. They didn't look good against Seattle. They got washed out against Real Salt Lake, and now they look good against San Jose. So the game will be rescheduled, so they still have 3 to go. They're still technically at this halfway point, and they've got 2 losses and an emphatic victory, coming off of a tournament that I thought they looked good in until they didn't, and they were eliminated. So I think up and down is the best way to describe LAFC over the course of the season. And in this state that they are right now, I think they need to embrace the victory and the confidence and kind of build on the second half against San Jose going into the match against the Galaxy on Sunday.
And Josh, I mean, this is a team, I believe in the first season, they did have the 2 back-to-back league losses against, if I remember correctly, it was the Red Bulls, and then they came home and they lost to Sporting Kansas City, and those were like the first time that they had lost consecutive league matches. And then they had that period last year, ironically around the same time, late August, early September, where they drew the Galaxy, lost to Minnesota United at home, and then they drew to Orlando, drew to Philly, and then drew to Toronto before they got back to winning against the Dynamo when they lifted the Supporters' Shield. But this hasn't been a team where they've had a lot of bad results back to back to back. And every time that they do, it seems like it's like the sky is falling type of moment, and there are all these, voices and things that are like, hey, this doesn't look like a team who's the same we were used to, blah, 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 blah. But do you sort of ascribe to what Ryan's saying, that this is just the nature of this season is going to be a little bit more wonky and up and down?
I think that's fair. There's no question that the season's wonky. It's going to be up and down. But to me, I saw a 3-game stretch, especially the last 2 losses prior to the 5-1 win, that were totally out of character. It was just from a competitive standpoint, it's like there was nothing. And that's not what you expect. You expect effort and energy, and you didn't get that. And so I thought that definitely it felt like a slump. It was like a no Carlos Vela slump, no Eduardo Atuesta slump. Someone's got to give answers to us, and Brian Rodriguez wouldn't do anything. And for a couple of games, Diego Rossi seemed out of it, asking too much of him. The back line couldn't defend. I have no problem calling those last 3 games, if you want to include the match against Orlando, a slump for LAFC based on expectations. It's I think most of the league at this point, if you listen to broadcasters, every time LAFC plays, they're one of the best in the league. They're one of the best in the league. It's like almost a given, but they certainly didn't play like that prior to the San Jose match. In San Jose, I think LAFC's gotten fat on San Jose in I think every match that they've played, basically.
Yeah.
And so if they didn't put up a number against San Jose, if there was a draw or if they lost, couldn't get 3 points, then I think we're like really hair on fire territory. But this was an important statement and righting the ship and getting back on track. They'll be competitive throughout the regular season. Still doesn't answer questions about their style of play. And do they have to be 100% in the playoffs to win? The great teams sometimes win when they're not at their best. But does LAFC have to be at their best to win games? I think that's a real high bar to have to clear if you're going to win in a regular basis. And so I think it's fair to call it a slump. I think it's fair to call some of the ideas and the way that they've been playing into question. They answered it emphatically against San Jose, and we'll see in the next 3. But to me, this was the first real downturn that I've seen of LAFC in their 3 years.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question to pose, right? Can LAFC be the type of team who can win games even when they're not at their best, when they don't have their best players or their best players aren't in their best form or, even conditions, right? We all know that LAFC would prefer not to play in day games. They would prefer not to play in hot weather and these kind of situations. I thought Dylan Hernandez had an interesting column following the Galaxy game. I was in the stadium calling that. Not calling that, but I was in the stadium doing a little podcast about the experience of covering sports during COVID. That it's an FCFC pod. You guys can listen to it, our sister podcast. But I thought Dylan's piece, really spoke to the fact that game against the Galaxy, and we'll talk more about them and what it'll mean for the second game shortly. It was just a horrible match. Like the whole thing front to back, LAFC played horrendously. The Galaxy did not play great, but they managed to get 2 goals and they managed to get the result. But it was, compared to the matches we had seen again between Galaxy and LAFC, and Ryan, you might attest to this being in Orlando and watching the match, it just didn't feel like any of the sting of a derby. It didn't feel like any of the intensity of the derby. The vibe in the building was obviously bizarre, not having supporters there. And I think Dylan Hernandez, as well as our buddy at the AP, whose name is now escaping me.
Greg Beecham.
Greg. He's these guys have covered sports all across LA, and they both told me that this was by far the strangest of all the sports that they've covered, more than Dodgers, more than the football, the NFL training camps, because of what being in Vega California Stadium usually feels like. Right. And so, maybe some of that's true. That you could draw up excuses for days, but I think, Josh, you bring up that excellent point. Can LAFC still get things done? With all these, things happening? MLS has always been a strange league in that way. Conditions are never what, say, a Bob Bradley would like them to be game in and game out. But the character of the team is really being called into question for this. And I think that's a really useful thing to do now at this stage, knowing that they only have to get into the playoffs to have a shot at MLS Cup, which is sort of their clearly stated goal. But before we get more into kind of this next section of games and whatnot, I also wanted to bring up, the protest of games that day. And Ryan, maybe it's natural to kick it over to you and just following the revolt of the black athlete, if you want to call it that. It's actually the title of a book from '69 that we read for FCFC Book Club. How has that been following for you, and how do you think it's manifesting within this team and folks like Mark Anthony Kaye, who we also have had on the podcast.
I think that there's this weird symmetry in that the NBA was the first league to kind of shut down in response to the pandemic, and the other leagues all followed suit. And it's kind of a similar situation where the NBA also started the lockout, not lockout, but the postponing of all professional sports in the reaction to the latest black man versus cop related incident out of Kenosha, Wisconsin, obviously close to the home of the Milwaukee Bucks. And I think the Bucks were the first team to the kind of the epicenter of the entire movement was the Milwaukee Bucks. But I personally loved it. I love to see it. I was curious to see whether it would resonate throughout all of the other professional sports. And I thought that it's a really powerful sentiment that it did, and that all professional players were united in that way, that that every teams in every league observed it for varying durations of time, varying amounts of games. Even doing it for one, I think allows you to sign your name on the proverbial petition, so to speak, to call out the bullshit on the side of the professional athlete, and also to take it into their hands and kind of say, they don't run the leagues, there are owners, but the leagues don't happen without the players, and sometimes the power of the players kind of muted for the sake of the rest of the league. But this was a particular point in time where that couldn't be the case, because the power does stand with the players. So it was really cool to see them use it in this way. And yeah, I love seeing Mark Anthony Kaye kind of come out and call out the league when the league released a statement saying that it was kind of a decision of the league to have the protest, and for Mark to come out on social media and say, no, it was the players, please change your narrative. This is history. This is history in real time. And when the ink dries, things will be remembered in certain ways based on how they're documented. So he thought it was very important for history to remember that the players were the agents of this protest, and nobody else. And I think that's really important, because there's a difference between the league doing it and the players doing it, and players beginning to realize the power that they have over their teams and their owners and their leagues, I think is really important, and will be really important moving forward. So, regardless and that's, talking specifically within the sports world, but just in general, these things continue to happen. Body cam footage from, upstate New York from March is released on FOIA, and now the news cycle is reacting to it like it didn't happen 6 months ago. But these things that just continue to happen, that continue to divide our country and our world, it's a real struggle. And as a black man, honestly, I ran out of words years ago to try to describe it to other people, but it's just the internal frustration is real, and there's a certain cathartic feeling when you see the rest of the world, just take notice and participate in fighting against it. And especially when it comes from a platform as high up as professional athletes, it's just nice to know that you're not alone, and that it's not only that people notice, but even people of your same color that aren't in your same tax bracket, because when it comes down to it, it's not just about race, it's also about class. So money is also a divider. And the protests coming purely from the heart of the athlete kind of transcends both of those lines. So that's kind of how I feel about it. It was, I kind of took a break from the NBA playoffs, in the moment to really appreciate, just didn't follow sports, didn't follow Twitter, just took the moment in, and, that I wanted a platform to kind of get that out. So I know that was probably a little extended, but that's
no.
That's a powerful thing, man.
These are the conversations we want to hear, the conversations we want to have. I do want to plug this book again, and if either of you have never actually read this book, it's really incredible. It's Harry Edwards, The Revolt of the Black Athlete. Obviously has the iconic photo of Tommy Smith and John Carlos here on the cover. It was our FCFC book club, and it's just incredible that he documents all the lead up with the universities and the college athletics and the Olympic Commission for Human Rights, which then obviously led to the protests in 1960, the 68 Olympics in Mexico City. It is an astonishing read, and it's also frightening in the ways in which this was a book that came out 51 years ago, and Harry Edwards' words sound like they could be written today, right? I had the privilege of interviewing John Carlos actually 12 years ago when I was still a college student. I'm probably going to put that out on the FCFC podcast about this book. And, people can listen to sort of me interview him. He was at Palm Springs High School. And it's interesting to hear the words of these guys that were involved back then and the foundations they laid for now. So, it's a rich history. And I'm personally, it's one thing I've been really, relieved to see sports actors taking the stage in the ways that Ryan described. And Mark Anthony Kaye, a guy we brought up, a guy who's now wearing the captain's armband for LAFC, really stepped up as a leader at a time where, again, Vela's not in the picture. Diamande has left, right? We've got a player like Bradley Wright Phillips who has a lot of experience, but he's coming into the team new. So Kaye has sort of filled that void both on a cultural, emotional, socio-political level, and also it seems on the field. In the game against San Jose, he really stepped up. But I was curious, Josh, this is sort of an ongoing conversation we've had about LAFC since the MLS is back. Where is LAFC on the leadership front? And when we did hear Bob Bradley specifically mention a lack of leadership along the back line of the defense, maybe playing into the reasons why they were conceding so many goals. What do you sort of read into that, knowing the players, the type of caliber of players they've lost and the experience of them, and how these young guys are kind of stepping up in ways they're maybe still learning?
I want to follow up on Ryan's point, and I appreciate everything he said. Athletes have been protesting in a lot of different ways for as long as I can remember. I mean, I wrote a book about Muhammad Ali, and he certainly used his voice, his platform to advocate for things that he believed in terms of empowering others like him. So, this is a moment in time that I think really sort of marshals all that energy that has existed before and focuses it in a way that I hope makes a huge difference. I think the people who sort of hammered the stick to sports have lost the game. There's no argument for them. You can't stick to sports. Sports and politics are intertwined, and they always have been. You're simply wanting to ignore the reality when you say something like that. So I think it's interesting that MLS protested the way they did, piggybacking off what the NBA players did. Now to see Real Salt Lake having to go in an ownership change. I mean, it just speaks to how quickly these things can change. And because they can change so quickly, it speaks to how tenuous really they are. These things are not on sure footing. It's just the way that it is because it's the way that it is. It doesn't have to remain that way. And I think we see so quickly that people's voices can impact those kinds of moments. And I hope that continues here. I really do. And again, I appreciate everything that Ryan said and what the athletes have said. I mean, people like LeBron James have taken really, I'm going to say like a hardline stance because it's clear in the sand. It's like, exactly where he is. And that's something that people talked about Michael Jordan never doing, right? You didn't want to encroach. Republicans bought sneakers too, right? I don't know whether he said it or not, but that's something that's ascribed to him. And so the fact of the matter is that we're living in a moment where this is a conversation in our country. It's a conversation globally. I mean, these were protests were happening all over the world because of something that was happening here. And hopefully it impacts change in a major way. In a lot of sense, I think it also makes the games feel much less important. But the fact that the athletes are walking away from the games kind of re-hones the focus, right? And it makes people feel like, I just wanted to tune into the game, and now they're not going to play the game, and now I have to think about this stuff. Well, yeah, damn right you have to think about this stuff because it's important. And the athletes are doing everybody a service. And yet when they get back to the field, we can still complain and bitch about how they're playing and say they're not good enough. And I think in the back line, to bring it back to your question, Alex, it had not been good enough. It wasn't a simple matter of personnel or tactics or philosophy. It just wasn't good enough across the board. And to see them, although I think they're very comfortable against San Jose and that style, that system, and handling that system, the late goal really meant nothing. It was a shutout, and I think it was good. I think it was nice to see Pablo Cisniega back there because Kenneth Vermeer, it just all seemed disjointed. There was no communication. No one would really it just didn't seem to work. And so I like that Bob Bradley said, hey, Pablo, you're getting your shot. It's definitely for a few games. Settle in. And I think he'll end up winning that job. I just haven't liked what I've seen from Kenneth Vermeer. And I think if you're talking about the defense and the back line and conceding goals, the first place you really have to look is what's the goalie doing. And some of the decision making and some of the discussion and lack of communication, I think, partly because he's a newcomer, partly because he's really freelances a lot. He goes out. Sometimes he'll make a mistake. He likes to go out on an island by himself. I think all of that with a back line that may not have been as cohesive in year two, I think that's all a detriment. So just sort of get back to basics. And just, I don't need to lecture anybody about what LAFC needs to do in the back line except give up less goals. And maybe that sounds so simplistic, but it's not. They're totally capable of it. And we know that most of that is predicated on how they control the ball and what they do in the midfield. And if they possess the ball and if they can counter press and get the ball back right away, then their defenders really aren't pushed except on counters. But if they're letting people possess and sort of make runs of their defense over and over and over again, I don't trust Dejan Jakovic and I don't trust Tristan Blackman to be consistently good enough that they're not going to get hurt and hit. And, if you're giving up goals, you're in risk of losing matches. And that's been their reality.
And I think you hit one of the key points with the opportunity that Cisniega has, right? Especially from a communication standpoint. If we're talking about disorganization in the back being an issue, obviously one of the key objectives for a goalkeeper is to make sure that not only is his just the back line set up, but the defensive shape is being kept in a way that's in accordance with what a team is trying to do. And we saw that break down a lot in both the Galaxy and the game against the Sounders. And, I sort of took a step back and thought about it. And I was like, okay, so Tristan Blackman's 24, Eddie Segura's 23. You've got Chigi Palacios, who's 21, and Latif, who's 21, or he might be 22. And even Pablo, I think, is only 25. So you got a bunch of young kids who are trying to figure it out, and no one's really, you had the Walker Zimmerman in there before, who was the de facto leader of the back line. I feel like even when Simon was in there, Walker was still the one sort of, marshaling the defense. And yes, LAFC has had two solid defensive performances this year, namely against Miami, the 1-0, and Lyon when they won 3-0. The two shutouts, the only two shutouts of the season. And it's not as if they couldn't sort of piece it together and make it happen, but you could tell right away in the San Jose game that things were just more organized. They were just more together. And I think some of that comes down to the team they were playing, and some of that goes down to the fact that maybe they've now spoken about and they recognize that loud vocal communication is necessary. And I do think it's relevant that Pablo can speak Spanish and English. And he mentioned that in today's presser. He brought that up in one of his answers in Spanish, talking about how it was a benefit in his game to be able to talk to his defenders in Spanish and in English and make sure that people are on the same page. And so I do think that he could emerge, ironically enough, as really the leader in the back line in that part of the field for LAFC, even as pieces like Andy Nahar come in. But Ryan, that was one key thing I also wanted to talk about today was, before we preview the Galaxy game, just a little quick, we're seeing Nahar more. We're seeing obviously the first homegrown signing ever, got his first minutes in Seattle, first pass in LAFC, academy player to team history was a pass to Adrian Perez, successful pass. Christian Torres is one of his other passes ended up being the sort of errant pass that led to the one goal against San Jose. But we're seeing Christian Torres, we're seeing Musovski score, we're seeing some of these sort of side players get into the mix now, and Sifu getting his first goal. What have you made of these other folks who are coming up and given chances now to perform, given the lack of uncertainty with the team and of course the injuries?
Well, lack of form and injuries are kind of circumstances that can force people into new situations. But we know that with this team, players that come in have to be there, experience a certain amount of practice time before they're going to be trusted in an ideal circumstance with that first team, with those first team minutes. And for someone like Cifuentes to be inserted into the midfield, in the starting midfield because of an injury to Atuesta, and have the game that he did, he's been here for a while. He played against Miami. He played against Lyon. He's been in practices. He's won the team's favor, and now he's in this position where yes, he's getting this opportunity to get these minutes, and it's unprecedented for him to this point. But it's also been long enough that you can have confidence in the fact that he'll be able to do the job for the team. And, against San Jose, he certainly did. And I think that, as you see guys are signed, it's almost like a clock is started, a stopwatch is initiated, and you're waiting for that integration period to happen, because you don't want them, if they're signed, on Thursday, you don't want them to be out on the field for that weekend's game, because that they're not going to have that LAFC way down. We've seen every player, whether they're big time or small time, come in and have to take time to learn it. I think that as you see these guys come in, you have that gestation period occur and pass. And then when they come in, you see how well they've integrated into the team. And so far, I think, we've gotten some really positive returns from Cifuentes. Obviously, cheers to you being right about Torres getting the minutes as the first homegrown player this season. Those are always going to come with, mistakes, but he is learning. It's invaluable experience that he's getting at this level. And, obviously, 5-0 scoreline makes it okay that he makes that errant pass. It's much less a situation than the Andre Horton nightmare against the Galaxy. But, I think it's essential, because the team has a lot of goals still. U.S. Open Cup canceled. They lost. MLS is back. I don't know how viable the Supporter Shield is, given, the shortened duration of the regular season. But they've made it clear, as you said, that the MLS Cup playoffs is the goal, and they're not going to lift the MLS Cup with just their first team. They're going to need their supporters. They're going to need their bench. They're going to need contributions from all directions. So getting these guys in, getting them experience, important experience, significant, first team regular season experience, I think is essential. But it's also important for this team to make sure that their guys are ingrained enough in practice to make sure that they're going to go out there and do well.
Well, if there's one team that they definitely want to do well against, especially given the fact that they lost 2-0 the last time out, it's going to be the Galaxy. And they're playing the Galaxy 7:30 p.m. this Sunday in Dignity Health Sports Park down in Carson. It will be an evening game, which there's supposed to be a heat wave here in the Los Angeles area. So I know that we're all going to be relieved that we'll have a better chance to see good football that night. And obviously the Galaxy are on a bit of a tear. That game against LAFC was their first victory of the year, and then they went on to beat both the Portland Timbers and who was the other one? Was it Real Salt Lake? I forget the second victory that they had, or the third victory that they had. But the Galaxy have been on a good run, and they are going to be hosting LAFC potentially with the addition of Chicharito Hernandez, as well as Jonathan Dos Santos, who put in minutes against Portland, and Efrain Alvarez, a product of their academy, who, just a little bit of trivia, brother of Carlos Alvarez, the first ever signing for LAFC. Here, both that family's from East LA, I believe. Carlos Alvarez, of course, never played for LAFC, but his kid brother Efrain is one of the brightest prospects in MLS academy talk, and he got his first goal. So the Galaxy are sort of on the rise, and LAFC, we know that they always are capable of doing big things. But, Josh, what do you expect out of this game, given the trajectory of the teams and just what we've been seeing, and where might what direction might this one take? LAFC blow out the Galaxy in the first match of the season. The Galaxy sort of beat LAFC, and LAFC had a horrible day. And the second one, how is this third one going to go? Is it going to be a little closer? Is it going to be more contested like we're used to them seeing?
Yeah, I expect it to be really competitive. LAFC couldn't have played worse in that matchup that we just saw. So I thought the Galaxy actually played well, pretty competent. No major mistakes, kept their composure, especially as they closed out the match. I thought they looked really professional, and people described them that way. So, they're certainly capable of that. They're on a good run. They believe San Jose, Portland, and the Galaxy, I think, is their stretch. They will not have Chicharito, according to Kevin Baxter. I saw him on Twitter saying the Galaxy doesn't expect Chicharito to play. So, look, you figure that LAFC has to perform better. And at home, whether the fans are there or not, the Galaxy are going to want to make sure that they don't lose all 3 points at home. I think it'll be a tighter game, maybe not the highest scoring game, but again, we never really know in this series. I'll say, because I think I'm the only one who watched the last match at home. Were any of you guys watch that last match on TV, or was I the only one?
No, I watched San Jose.
No, the Galaxy match.
I watched that on TV as well.
Okay. Yeah, on TV, it certainly didn't feel like much. Missing that 3-2-5-2 energy, even with the sound being pumped through the speakers, it wasn't there. It feels like it'll probably be totally dead down at Dignity Health Sports Park, and that may help both teams in some way. I don't know. But I think the Galaxy are going to have to feel better about this matchup. They're not going to come into the match confident. Obviously, LAFC is not going to come in overconfident in any kind of way. They'll be hungry to right the ship. I do think competition between the two of them will be ramped up. It'll be a better quality match, I hope. But I don't think we're looking at a blowout either way. 3 or 4 goals is the most. So yeah, a draw would not at all surprise me.
Ryan, what are you sort of thinking that this is gonna shape up like?
If you take the combination of the last 2 matchups, I mean, they had that emphatic victory at MLS is back in the group stage, and then this listless loss and an empty bank, and you put those together. I think the biggest thing for the matchup is just who the Galaxy field, because obviously in the 6-2 drubbing, they were without Dos Santos or Chicharito. Then they got Dos Santos back in a limited experience for the game that they won, but now they're saying that there's a chance, perhaps, that they'll have them both. And I think if they do, then LAFC is definitely going to have to put forth a better performance than they did in the 2-0, or else I think they could be looking at the wrong side of a blowout. I think that the second half of the San Jose match is a source of confidence, but even more so than one half of good football is the 90 minutes of poor football you put against the Galaxy in the last time that you played them. So it's definitely an opportunity for them to right that ship. I think that the Galaxy, if you want to say that San Jose plays in a system that LAFC is comfortable with, the Galaxy is a team historically that plays very similar to LAFC and can give them trouble if they catch them out, as any team can, on the counter. So I think it'll be an interesting opportunity to see if LAFC can bounce back to form on a consistent basis. If they can put an entire 90 minutes of good football against the Galaxy, then it gives you hope against Real Salt Lake and Portland to round out this first phase. But if they continue to struggle or show signs of weakness in this game, then I think the entire their livelihood for the season in this first stage is somewhat perilous if they're still struggling at the end of 4 of the first 6.
And this is a team again who's always scored so many goals, who last season also conceded so few goals. This last stretch, 6-6, 6 goals for, 6 goals scored against. It's been a stated and obvious thing that LAFC have to concede less. Looking ahead to Salt Lake, they'll be playing that following Wednesday, and then Portland the Sunday game a week from the Galaxy match. 2 teams that again have playoff and knockout history against LAFC. All the storylines sort of write themselves. In Salt Lake's case, this is a team that's coming off of an ownership, currently undergoing an ownership change and sort of an organizational upheaval. Portland obviously won the MLS is Back tournament, and they've been sort of mixed since then, but always a strong team. Are there anything that you guys want to see out of just this bigger picture, the last 3 games of this phase, before we find out what's next with MLS and what kinds of games we expect?
Josh?
Yeah, I just want to see consistency. Just kind of like just the highs and lows, get away from that. Just more across the board consistency. It doesn't have to be all out energy, dominance, counter press, kill them every second. But you don't want to see scrambling in the back. You don't want to see the scenarios that they get in trouble. Just a little bit more of that, and it goes back to what we said earlier in the show. So LAFC is much better off if they are walking on the pitch comfortable, that they can attack the way they want to attack without really being in danger of giving up goals. Once you start having to get into 3-3, 4-4 kind of firefights, you never know what's going to happen. just a little bit more sustainable performance, I think, would go a long way to the rest of LAFC season.
Yeah, I echo that same sentiment. Consistency, and if I want to specify the idea a little bit, consistency in that back line and goalkeeper, specifically goalkeeper. If it's going to be Cisniega, then kind of as we've been saying, let it be Cisniega. Whoever it's going to be, let it be that person, and let them get established and comfortable in goal as opposed to going back and forth. But the back line itself, I think that the team's really feeling the effect of the Walker Zimmerman trade, because as you said, he was that de facto leader, and where I think they thought they might have had more leadership and a more readily available in-house plug-in replacement to keep the team at a certain level. That's clearly proven to not be the case so far. They need to progress on defense. They need to establish that leadership, that voice, that communication, and try to string together some really strong defensive performances to try to just level the ship out, because they're scoring, they're moving the ball, they're possessing the ball, they're doing all of these things that we're used to LAFC doing. They're just conceding so much that it's taking away from their ideals that we're used to them employing.
Yeah, I'm sure Bob Bradley will be looking for getting things a little bit more regular, under control, consistency, competency. These players are dealing with so many issues, just like all of us are in our own lives, something that has been discussed at LAFC press conferences. But yeah, if he can ask for anything, I think you just want a little bit of that over these next few weeks, so that the likes of Carlos Vela, returning to health. He was jogging at training today, not participating. Edward Atuesta participated in training today for the first time, played in the middle as the sort of joker role, and was redistributing balls and passes. So those are good signs for them. But getting these other guys up to speed, especially the newer players who have not had a normal first season at a new club, obviously, continue to get them used to the LAFC way. I think if you can put all those pieces together, wherever you finish in the table, as long as you get into the postseason, you're going to feel good about the fact that you can make another run at another knockout tournament and try to get over that hump of being, the de facto best team in MLS the last two seasons, but without, the victory in a knockout tournament to match, and sort of those gritty performances. So, yeah, if you're Bob, you also just want to see shutouts. And if you're Mr. Alex Dwyer, you just want to see Christian Torres, 16-year-old, score a goal, right? So, we all want different things, but this team is still inevitably great to follow. I'm so happy that, Josh, you took time to also give your thoughts about things going on, and I'd be remiss to not mention the book is called Ali versus Inoki. It's a book I got right here on my shelf. It's an incredible story. Check out Josh's book. Obviously, Muhammad Ali's story in relation to sports protests is long and historied, and it's incredible work that he put together there. And I wanted to just sort of end today's episode. I've got, just based on the things I heard you guys talk about, I'm going to quote my boy Harry Edwards here, The Revolt of the Black Athlete. Early in the book, he writes, "The simple truth of the matter is that the sports world is not a rose flourishing in the middle of a wasteland. It is part and parcel of that wasteland, reeking of the same racism that corrupts other areas of society." So, just to reiterate, we're behind the athletes, and we want to continue to see this happen because it is an extension of things going on in this country, and it always has been. Josh Gross and Ryan Wallerson, thank you guys so much. The game is at 7:30 this Sunday, followed again Wednesday and the following Sunday. This first one's the big one against the Galaxy. And for season pass, next stop, Carson.
Peace, y'all.